Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the second round of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup, which took place in Dublin. 5 races. I'm coming from Dublin, but coming to you from the Netherlands. As always, my very knowledgeable partner Issam. Thank you for being here.
From the Netherlands, indeed. Thank you for having me.
It's 1 hour earlier where I am. It's 8:30 here as we're recording. Let's dive in. It's been a long day of cross. I was there at 7:15 this morning. But we'll start with the last race, the Men Elite race, and then we'll work our way back through the races until we discuss all of them. In the Men Elite race, Toon Aerts had the whole shot. The rider from Deschart Hens FSP was very eager to prove himself. For the first time in a very long time, he could line up on the front row due to his top 8 placement in the World Cup in Antwerp. But the conditions when the Men Elite raced were quite fast. Most of the course had dried out. There was some mud in the back part of the course, but it was quite hard to break away. So in the first lap, there was a leading group of 15, 16 riders, and that slowly got thinned out to a group of 10 and then to a group of 6. Most of the work there was done by Michael van Toerenhout until he needed to go into the pits to change his shoe because his boa broke. Van Toerenhout still managed to get back into the leading group and set the pace again, but there were 6 leaders going together into the final lap. In that final lap, Elie Iserbyt took the lead, and in true Elie Iserbyt fashion, it looked like he was ready to take victory. He was leading in the final part, but then messed up a corner. This really reopened the battle because Iserbyt was now kind of with his bike being a bit clumsy. He blocked Joran Viseuren, who was in his wheel. Aerts didn't know what to do, and then Van Toerenhout took the lead. Iserbyt was in second, kind of blocked, but not too much. Above all, it was Aerts who tried to get into the wheel of Van Toerenhout, but was completely knackered. He had nothing left. Van Toerenhout went on to take victory ahead of Aerts, and Iserbyt needed to let Philippe Orts ahead in the final corner. So the podium was Van Toerenhout, Aerts, Orts. Issam, for a long time, this looked like the prime Elie Iserbyt race. Van Toerenhout in 2 sections makes the race super hard. Iserbyt sits in the wheel, waits for his moment to come, and like he always does, he takes the lead in the right moment. And it looked to be like that. He looked to have them where he wanted to be. He was in the lead. He was putting the pressure on. You could see Aerts didn't have much left. He was slowly opening a gap of a few bike lengths. But then he messed up. Kind of, you've said it before, kind of like the trend this season. Iserbyt makes too many silly, clumsy mistakes. Today it cost him, but luckily for the team, it was Van Toerenhout who benefited.
It's not the first time we have seen it so far from Iserbyt this season. And I think he truly threw away a victory. And as you said, I think they were very lucky that Toon Aerts was on the wrong side of the incident, I would say, and was held up a little bit more. And there was Van Toerenhout out of, I would not say nowhere, because as you said, he made the race hard and he was there at the front for several times, and he made it very difficult to be in the wheel of Iserbyt. They played it well, they played the games well. I think that they were on the limit, but it was again, I think, reasonable what they were doing. It's annoying, obviously, but you have to work with it. And I think that Toon Aerts managed that in some way all right. And I think that Viseuren as well saw the danger. But then when Van Toerenhout came there he stalled it in a way and was there. He was in the lead, and Iserbyt was right there behind him and covered it off for him quite nicely. And I think, when he got the gap, Van Toerenhout knew what his assignment was and made sure that Toon Aerts, who didn't really have much left, was not going to be able to bridge it. And I think that Van Toerenhout finished it off perfectly. I think that he, in a way, the results that performance that he has put in and the last couple of weeks, there was a trend upwards and it looked better and better, but we were just waiting for a race where something like this could happen and he could make some profit out of it. And I think he did just that. He got everything went his way at that moment and he got the win. And, I think that it was, when you go with 4 or 5 riders into the last lap and they all have some sort of a chance of winning, you can expect these kind of things to happen because then it's the details that will decide who will win. And I think Van Toerenhout had the details in his favor and got away with it.
I think we spent plenty of time last week talking about how Paul Sousa turned things around. And in case you didn't know, Van Toerenhout has been training in Spain midweek, trying to regain some form. And as you said, Issam, that led to an increase in form. His results were better last week, 2 times on the podium. And he looked good today. He did set the pace and he was active. But still, it was a lot of working for Iserbyt, and that's the same as last week. The team really wants the results now. They've not been satisfied with them so far. So you could see in the final lap that Van Toerenhout was launching the dive bombs a couple of times. He was trying to make the moves to get in the wheel of Iserbyt to play the team tactics, but they were super alert after last week. Viseur a couple of times with some aggressive but fair moves. Also saw Aerts defending it. Everyone was aware of what happened. It's kind of as if last week was like an eye-opener. Like, okay, we haven't seen these team tactics in a while, but clearly they're back, so we need to be extra alert on them. And I like to see that battling. It was some good wheel-to-wheel racing, some shoulder rubbing, but nothing over the line. And then Iserbyt, it's almost like the lights were too bright at that moment that he was already thinking he got it in the bag, because it was quite a silly mistake. Of course, I don't actually think that's what happened with Iserbyt. I think he just messed up, and that happens sometimes under pressure. But it's more frequent this year than in other years for him. And Viseur is ultimately the one that pays the real price for it, because Viseur rode a very, very strong race. He impressed me. He was tactically very, very strong, very aware. He was present. He was not doing anything crazy. He was sitting in the wheels. His positioning was on point. He was in second wheel. Iserbyt had him a bit under pressure, but it would still have been enough for a podium. And in these dry conditions, I'm sure Viseur would have wanted this course to be like it was last year, a drag fest, super muddy. But yeah, I thought Viseur rode a strong race, and I think that's also something we kind of saw coming last week, because in Antwerp he was fourth. His form has also been improving again after what was a somewhat underwhelming period following that win in Ruddervoorde.
Yeah, he definitely looked very good this race, and I think that I don't know if he had enough to battle it out in the end. I think that he just came a little short, I would say, and I don't know why. Maybe he was, as you said, they were very much aware of the whole games and not really letting Van Toerenhout be at the front and Iserbyt second, or the other way around. You know, they noticed it that the team tactics could be played, although the course didn't give them much playing ground for the team tactics. I definitely think that they were very much aware, and they were really riding attentively in terms of the way they tried to position themselves in the group. Maybe that costed him a little bit of energy there, I would say, but I think that the form for him was very good. He probably would have liked it a little slower if some rain would have hit the course. That probably would have been more in his favor, or at least a little more rain, because it was some places a little bit tricky, but obviously it was a lot drier than I expected before the race. But I think that it was a very solid outing for him, and I think that as you said, it was a tendency that we saw with Viseur as well. It looked a little bit better last weekend. It's looking good again, and the question is that a trend that will go upwards, or will it kind of stay neutral, or will we see some results that dip down a little bit in terms of performance? That's kind of the question, but we are going to get a couple of courses, excluding Cabras a little bit, because I think that was a fast course, the World Cup in Italy. I think apart from that, we are going to get some tough races, and I think that could be something that could play in his favor. And if he can continue the trend, that's going to be very interesting indeed.
Viseur isn't racing Cabras, I think. I think he's going to train in Spain, and then it's Namur, which I don't think suits him. But yeah, over Christmas there should definitely be a couple of courses that he can do well at. I think Hulst is a fairly decent course for him. Maybe Zonhoven, I don't really know actually. But definitely Besançon, I think, is a course that he will fare well on. And of course Dendermonde, if it's muddy, is something he will love. Somebody else who loves the mud is Toon Aerts. He was also fighting for the positions, making sure that Van Toerenhout and Iserbyt didn't play their games. But I'm less of a fan of the style of how Arts rode than of how Sveik was riding. Because Arts, okay, he starts on the front row. He's clearly super, super eager to show himself, which I get. But just like in Beringen, the first race of the season for him, it looks like this enthusiasm just gets to him. He has never really been like the clutcher. He is more of a choker, actually. How many times has Toon Aerts made silly mistakes in the final laps? I recall Besançon a couple of years ago with the sliding on Iserbeat and many, many moments like that. But today, again, just like in Beringen, he makes his move too early. He's clearly very strong. Yes, these course conditions don't suit him the best, but still, why attack with like a lap and 3/4 of a lap to go? You're in the mix. You know what the course is like. You know it's quite a strong headwind into the section you're attacking. Why attack there? Yes, he got a gap for a very brief moment, but then when he was caught, he kept on pushing. It doesn't make too much sense, and if he wants to win these races and capitalize on that good starting position, he needs to race smarter, because else he needs to count on raw power. And these conditions like today, which we've had for most of the season, don't allow for that.
Yeah, technically it was a bit of a mess. Although I have to say his positioning was all right today, and I think that definitely deserves some credit. And his power and his performance today was very good. Tactically, however, I think that and we have known it a little bit already from Arts from before his suspension, that he is someone that is not always at the right time at the right moments, and doesn't really pick his moments well, and is not attacks at moments where you think you could save the legs a little bit. It would have been way better if he would have saved up for the last lap, be in the wheel of Iserbeat, and countered that effort that Iserbeat was putting in the last lap. And I think that would have probably given him the win. And I think he would have been capable of doing that, considering how, despite everything, despite all the efforts, he was still quite close, and he didn't really crack when he was in the wheel of Iserbeat. You know, there was somewhat of a gap. I think it was reasonable, and he was there or thereabouts. So I don't know. It's maybe he's not used to racing up front, but as we said already, it's something that we have seen from before his suspension. So it's not something new, and we have to wait and see if he's going to get his course where it is, as you said, more demanding. You know, the power depending and less tactical, because we're not always going to get these races where we're entering a last lap with 4 or 5 riders that basically could, fight for a podium. So I think that for him, it will be a case of either trying to ride a little bit smarter, or get a race that suits him perfectly, and then he could maybe fight for victory without all the tactics, and just be at the front, because there will be races where you have to be at the front from basically lap 1 or 2, and you just have to put in the efforts, and it doesn't really matter who is in your wheel, because they will crack eventually if you put them on a certain pressure. And I think that he knows that in a way, but for a race like today, it should have been way smart if he was tactically just a bit more on it, I would say.
Yeah, and as you say, today the positioning from the get-go was important, and someone that really needs to get that like consistently good is Sveik, because today, again, like we've seen earlier this season, he spends a lot of the race being on the back foot, and that costs a lot of energy. He finishes 9th in the end, and that could definitely have been better. I wouldn't go as far as saying he would have certainly been on the podium, because you needed some luck in the end, and we can definitely conclude that Orts is lucky. In some way, he creates his own luck by being strong and being in that leading group, but because of all the shenanigans up front when Iserbeat made that mistake, Orts is all of a sudden piloted into a position in which he can clinch a podium result, which is obviously great for him, but on pure metric today, he didn't really deserve it.
He was a little off, and I think that if you purely based on where he was in the last lap, I think that a podium would have been, thinking that he would manage to pull that off would have been somewhat of a stretch. But I think that his effort in the end showed that if his positioning was a little better. I definitely think with that, that bike change wasn't the most, fortunate moment, I would say, in the race, and that somewhat killed him. And then he had to kind of wait till it would slow down up front, but it didn't really do so. And yeah, it was a struggle for him, and I think that he was lucky in the end with the incident happening, and he could have been actually a little bit more lucky there, maybe even pull second or even win it if it wasn't for Van Toerenhout getting out of there. But I think that he should be very happy again. His effort again was quite good. He was up there, and I think that is also important for him that he's quite consistent this season. There has been some races where he wasn't up for the challenge or something happened, but I think overall he has been somewhat of a constant factor in the top 5, or at least fighting for the top 5. And I think that should be a very encouraging sight for him in terms of how this season could develop for him. And I think that he is showing the promise for on a consistent basis this season. And if he's able to continue to do so, I think that it will be great for him, but also great for cyclocross. And it's I think it was positive to see him on the podium, despite the fact that he didn't completely deserve it. He was still up there, and I think that his effort created his luck in a way. And it was good to see that he was able to benefit from the mishaps that happened in front of him.
Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Van Toerenhout took the win and is now the leader in the World Cup. Tonaert took second ahead of Felipe Orts, who is the first Spaniard to claim a World Cup podium. Elie Iserbyt ended fourth ahead of Joran Wiesure. Decent ride by Pim Ronhaar, who finished sixth. Lars van der Haar finished seventh. As discussed last week, this is not his best time of the season. Kevin Kuhn finished in a solid 8th place ahead of Laurens Zweek, and the 10th place went to Gerben Kuipers. Two things, Issam. So first, in the first lap, there was this crash on the barriers. Boros, who was way at the front, landed too far on his front wheel, crashed, and caused kind of chaos. Not just kind of chaos, straight up chaos there. Riders going down. One of them to go down was Nice. Nice crashed. He laid on the ground for a minute, then got going again, and put in a couple of hot laps before eventually retiring from the race. He got hit real bad after the crash. That's why he was in a lot of pain. So I think he just kind of tried to make the best out of it. But he said afterwards that he had to quit because his ankle started hurting more and more. It's clearly not been the good couple of weeks for Nice after that win in Lokeren. It kind of went downhill for him, so hopefully the ankle isn't too bad. Hopefully with a bit of ice and cooling he will be fine. He'll be heading to Spain now for a training camp, and his World Cup classification is ruined now anyway. His race last week wasn't good, a DNF now. So if he needs more time off, he can just skip Namur and come back for Christmas Cross. Then secondly, the 10th place finisher Gerben Kuipers, Issam. I would be curious in your thoughts on him, because last year at the start of the season he was super strong. He had that win in Ardøya. He looked good in a couple of other races, especially in Dendermonde, but sometimes the start wasn't right there. Then illness, season ended, ruined. Now he comes back here, and we were super positive about him in Rudderford. He said he was peaking for this phase of the season. Yes, the courses don't suit him, but where are we on the Gerben Kuipers curve? Like, do we need to start worrying about him, that the potential isn't coming out, or did we overrate him? Where are we on the curve?
It's hard to say. I don't think we overrated him. I think that we were quite realistic with what we expected from him in a way, and he hasn't delivered. And I have to say that I was, funny enough, I was thinking about this during the race and also after, when I was looking through the results again and the lap times and all that. And I think that I'm kind of at the point that I'm saying, if I have to pick a sort of disappointment of the season so far on the men's side, I think that he is one of them, because I feel that he, if you compare it to the capabilities that he has or had, or that we have shown, and the ability, obviously he is technically he's definitely not the most gifted cyclocross rider, but he has the power, and the thing is, he showed promise, but it hasn't come out yet. And I think today it was a tricky race, but I feel that today he should have been a little bit closer to at least where Ronhaar and Van der Haar finished. He should have been a lot closer to those guys, and now he wasn't. I don't know if there is a reason for that. As you said, this was the period that he wanted to be good or better at, and there are still, there is an important phase of the season coming up, but I don't know. It's at the moment not looking good, and it's as I said, rather disappointing. Currently, he's up there for, I think, having the most disappointing season in terms of the expectation that I had, at least in my view and in my opinion. And I mean, my opinion is not always the right one, right?
Well, not always, but I would agree he has been quite disappointing, and Verstringen, who wasn't here today, has also been somewhat underwhelming after a promising season start. I don't know, maybe Gerben Kuipers is really just using his next training camp in Spain to relift himself, and once the muddy races come, he'll do better, but it's kind of hard to see. So I wouldn't say he's been super bad, because he's still in the top 10 of a bunch of these races. He was 7th at the European Championships, he was 5th in Kortrijk last week, he is in the top 10 of this World Cup, so we also need to factor in where he comes from. He turned pro last season, before that he was on Proximus. He did have that 6th place at the World Championship, so I agree that we didn't overrate him. There was real reason to be excited about him, but maybe we need to accept that linear progression doesn't exist. It goes up and down, and maybe Kuipers he had his biggest down last year, but he's still in a bit of a down, and he's working his way out there. Then on to the women's race. Here it was Zoe Backstedt who had the best start, but who else than Mari Schreiber took over in the first lap to set the pace. That wasn't long lasted, because Fem van Empel took the lead towards the end of the first lap, but then she got a flat tire and needed to go into the pits. This was the sign for Lucinda Brandt, who had a somewhat bad start, to take the lead and try and break away from Van Empel. She successfully did so. Van Empel was about 10-15-ish seconds back after her puncture, but Van Empel managed to pretty much close the gap to the wheel of Brandt. However, once she was just about to get on that wheel, she messed up in the sandpit and needed to dismount early. From there on, she never saw the rear wheel of Brandt again. Brandt went on to take victory ahead of Van Empel. Behind there was an interesting battle for the third podium spot. Vash, Backstedt and Van der Heijden were duking it out, with Backstedt ultimately getting the upper hand. Isam, last week we spent some time talking about Van Empel coming back, that freshness might have played a role. Because of the puncture, it's maybe not completely fair to draw conclusions today, but still, it was not the same Van Empel as we saw last weekend. Van Empel made that mistake in the sandpit, which was a really silly one. I haven't seen anyone mess up the sandpit from the front runners all day. In fact, most of the runners at the back of the race made it through without any issue. But she made a mistake there, and it completely changed the race, because after that mistake she never really came close to threatening Brandt anymore.
Yeah, and I think that also, she made the mistake, which wasn't great, but then kept on running for quite a while I think that she could have been mounting on the bike again, because there was a path where you could get back on your bike and get the speed going. I think that she lost some unnecessary time again there. But the mistake itself is probably the quite questionable. I mean, obviously with the punctures, not much you can do, and you got to change the bikes. And I think that she showed there that the form is very good. I'm just kind of, I don't know if it was when Brandt got the gap, obviously with the mishap, if Van Empel physically wasn't able to get back, or mentally wasn't really able to reset and get in a groove and try and bring up the fight to Brandt, because we know that Brandt, when she gets a gap, she's obviously going for it till the finish line, and she's probably one of the best in holding on to a gap. And I think chasing someone like that, you need to be very strong, both physically and mentally in a way. And I think that it felt like we were watching a Van Empel from before the trainings camp. And the question is, was Antwerp really a show of freshness and not really so much a display of just getting better and coming back stronger? I think I would still argue that she came back stronger from the training camp, and it's not only the freshness that played a role there. And to be honest, I think that today, if she didn't do the mishap that she did, probably, and with the puncture as well, that didn't help, which cost her quite some effort as well to get back to the front. I think that her chances of winning were obviously going to be a lot bigger, but that's obviously not how the race went, and I think it's for Brandt a job well done, because she sensed the moment with the puncture, passed Van Empel immediately, and knew that she had to put her on the pressure. And it wasn't also easy for Brandt, and I think that the way she rode today was remarkable and very strong. And I think that the way she was racing also in Antwerp, because again, I think the gap, it grew, but it never really grew to a point where where Van Empel really rode away from Brandt. It stabilized at a certain point, and I think that's just that ability that Brandt has. She can fight for almost nothing in a way, and make something out of that. And I think mentally you need to be very strong, and that in a way won her the race.
I'm not sure I entirely agree, because I do think Brandt made a much stronger impression than Van Empel on me on the backside of the course, even despite that puncture. Like on that muddy part, she was powering away. Like she significantly increased her gap there every single time. And then she lost some time in the front part of the course, around the sandpit, those corners, the dry part of the course. I wonder if Brandt was maybe running a more aggressive thread, or if it was just her strength, that she could really use her power in that section. It's one of the two. But Van Empel, I don't know if, like, okay, yes, she made that mistake, and yes, she came back from 10 to 15 seconds down, but like after that mistake, it was also over for her. So sure, this is not a completely fair result to say, well, last week it was just the freshness, and now Van Empel is more at the same as Brandt after a double race weekend. I agree. I would agree that she came stronger from that training camp, but at the same time, it's also not the idea that some people had last week, which I kind of tried to warn for, that now Van Empel is going to win every single race until the end of the season, regardless of the form of others. Van Empel was decent today, but it wasn't that special. And Brandt looked okay, and we'll see how it goes at Christmas. Both are going to go training now. Alvarado was already training. So we will see what balance we can draw up after that. There will be definitely some openings for other riders next week in Cabras, because I don't think Brandt, Van Empel or Alvarado are racing there. I'm not sure about Backstedt, who was third today. I thought it was a good ride by Backstedt, and to be honest, apart from maybe making this course muddy, you can't really wish for a much better course if you are Backstedt to suit her abilities.
I definitely think that she got a course where she definitely wasn't hampered by anything, and I think that she was able to show the strong legs that have been getting better and better week in, week out. And I think that it's just that upwards trajectory that I've been talking about, that I'm trying to find with certain riders, and I think with Buckstead it's there. It's getting better and better. And today was a very promising result, and a great race from her side. I think that there is obviously, I feel that there is definitely still some growth in terms of the technical abilities, but she definitely, it looked better in several aspects and several departments. I think that it was for her a very good race, and I think that she definitely deserved the podium. Raced very well, was attentive. Try to make things work, and I think that sometimes you can take a little bit too much initiative as a rider, but I think that she benefited from that more than it worked against her. And was in the end, she had the battle with Van der Heijden, but made sure that she got on top there, and very good result, I think, for her.
Blackstead should definitely take some confidence from these first few races of the season. She's been quite consistent also on courses that don't really suit her, and now she gets a course that caters to her abilities better, and that results in a third place, her first World Cup podium of the season. She's now also, I think, the leader in the U23 World Cup based on the last result. I mean, she's tied in points with Schreiber, so that should be an interesting duel between those two in the rest of the season. But of course, a lot will depend on how many races each of them does and which ones they skip and who also skips those races, etc., etc. But yeah, it was definitely a good race for her. And I already mentioned Schreiber. She rode decently but had a puncture. There were not that many punctures over the day. So I feel at the back part of the course where the mud definitely got deteriorated throughout the day, that was a place where you could puncture. But apart from that, it's not really rocky here in Ireland. So I would put this in the category unlucky that Van Empel and Schreiber, two of the riders at the front of this race, had a puncture rather than there being a structural issue with the course. But of course, that's something that needs to be looked into if there's any future editions of this race. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Behind Brandt, Van Empel and Baxit we find Van der Heijden. Then 5th place went to Vash ahead of Worst, Schreiber, Ribeirol, Pentveld and Van Alphen. I don't feel there are that many things to point out. I mean, Van der Heijden, good race. I think this is probably her best race of the season. Maybe you could argue that 2nd place in Heerde. Or I would definitely say this is better than her 3rd place in Kortrijk last week, but things are seeming on the up for her. And then Vash Issam, she was in that podium battle, but I said it before, at the European Championships, you weren't there in that podcast, but I have serious questions about the SD Works staff in general, but especially in their cross staff. Lars Boom left, and now their cross department is led by a road rider who doesn't really have much experience, hasn't been in the team that long. There's talks about Macherus joining, but there seems to be like no guidance there, because Vash, first of all, she's pitting every lap, which is definitely not needed at that point in the race anymore. Like maybe pit once or twice, or you saw a lot of riders like go in to switch tires early in the race because they found the course was different than when they pre-rode. But there was no need to go in every lap. I think she even changed twice in a lap at some point. And also in the back part of the course, there was this run-up. And Vosh, okay, cool, you ride it in the first lap, you gain absolutely nothing. You don't get any style points in this sport. You should run that because the risk does not even come remotely close to the reward of that. And you saw that in the second lap. She can't make it up anymore because there's some tiredness setting in. And she can't dismount because the hill is too steep and she'll fall backwards. So she needs to like crab to the top, which loses her easily 5-6 seconds. Those are the things you should have staff for, that tells you certain things that you might not only see if you're on the bike as a rider.
Let's just say that if she was Sven Nys in any way was involved, he would have said something about either of those, both things. To be honest, I think that it was especially that with trying to climb, I think that is something that if you want to take the risk, it's something that you should take on the last lap. And when it matters for something. Other than that, I don't really think there was any reason for that, because even the gain wasn't that large, to be honest, because you come up there and it's barely faster than running, and you kind of come on at that point, and mounting back on your bike doesn't really cost you that much time either. So it was just the changing the bikes was also something that if they had someone that was somewhat competent, I think they would have said something about that and told her to change every 2 laps, because I think that the circumstances were there to do that, and I think other riders did that as well, and you just saw the time that she was losing. And it's not only the time that you lose, but it's also the effort that you have to put in to try to get back. And I think that can be really killing. And I feel that today, probably if she didn't do that, she would have been, disregarding the mistake and the time that she lost there. I think that only the bike changing, which is something that you could have changed, I think if she didn't do that, she would have been closer to that 3rd place battle. Maybe even that would have been on the podium. I don't know. That would have been a battle of itself, but she would have been closer for sure, because the form is there. Powerful. The effort is there. She's able to be somewhere around there in the groups battling for a top 5. Small things that if you had people around you that were a little bit more competent, I would say, then it would have been better, I guess. And this is an issue, and they, it's difficult for a team to be critical on that and be like, we need someone with more experience. And that is maybe something that has to come from the riders itself. And that's a difficult task, to be so critical towards your environment. But I think at some point they need to be, because you cannot really go and continue like this, I would say. But we have to wait and see how that all will play out. But for the moment, it doesn't look great, I have to say.
Well, is it really that hard to be critical of the environment from the team? Because this is clearly like a last minute band aid. Because they had Lars Boom. Lars Boom left quite suddenly for the team. Christian Kos is their cyclocross responsible. He got added to the team at the end of September. He came from AG Insurance and moved here. Then he's all of a sudden piloted into the cyclocross department. Like, is it hard to look at that and say, well, this is just our temporary solution and we need somebody else? I don't feel like that should be hard for a professional sporting team, because he was also not signed with this intention. He was brought on as a director sportif for the road, and that is what he should probably do. And they should have Majerus or anybody else that has some cyclocross experience coach here. Like Backset, she's coached by Geert Wellens this season. Canyon SRAM, they invested in getting somebody with cyclocross experience on the entourage for her, which I think is really good. From the rest of the top 10, there was not much that stood out to me, but I would like to make one comment about something outside of the top 10 before we move on with our discussion. Fleur Moors finished 12th today, and Imogen Wolf finished 20th, and I just find it an interesting observation to see Fleur Moors, how she's doing now compared to how she's doing not necessarily last season, but I recall seeing her race 2 years ago, for instance, at the World Championships in Hogerheide, but I also saw her race the World Cup in Zonhoven and in Val di Sole. She's a rider that's the product of development, and that translates into her results, because when she was a junior, she was a second year. She did not really stand out that much compared to Imogen Wolf. In fact, I think Imogen Wolf as a first year was mostly better than she was. But clearly she's on the Balwas team. She gets the road program. She's the Belgian. So there's heavy investment in her. And that's, of course, completely justified. And you can see that it starts to pay off, because she is getting more confident. Yes, there's still a lot of work to do in the cornering, but she trains in Lichtaert every week in the midweek. She's improving. She's becoming more confident, especially that confidence on the bike. That's something that's extremely visible if I compare this compared to 2 years ago. Also at those World Championships in Antwerp, when she was not confident at all. In Hogerheide, not Antwerp. So that's something that's paying off. And then if you look at like Imogen Wolf, who's now on Visma, that's still very much a road rider racing cross. And yes, this course was good for her. And yes, 20th as a first year U23 is a decent result. I guess I was maybe hoping for a bit more because of that 15th place in Gavere last year, but that should definitely not be our standard for her. But if she can get maybe one more result like that, I'm just super eager and excited to hopefully see something like that. Then Issam, if we move on, one point I would like to discuss before we go to the U23 race is just this event in general here in Dublin. This is my second year in a row being here. It's definitely not a bad event. It's organized quite well. It's not my favorite, and that has to do with two things. First of all, the parking is quite far away, which is somewhat annoying. But whatever, it can't be perfect. And secondly, it's maybe a bit silly, but because I'm videoing and doing the Instagram reel stuff, it's super annoying for me that the course is so stretched and there's this pinpoints around the equestrian arena, which is super hard to navigate by, which makes it just a giant pain. But apart from that, I don't think cyclocross can permit to lose a venue like this, because there are not many World Cups, big races outside of the Netherlands and Belgium, especially outside of Belgium. But I do question the sustainability of this event. I hope it stays for the reasons I just articulated, but again, there were not that many spectators today. 2,500, maybe. It looked a little bit better than last year, but not much better. In the first year, there were 8,000 spectators. Tom Pidcock raced, Van Aert raced. Again, some riders skipped, not as many as last year, but it also wasn't stacked. I question the sustainability of this event, and you can kind of see the way that it's heading for the World Cup next year, right, Issam? I mean, we've learned this week that next year the French World Cup is going to be in Flamanville instead of Besançon, and it's going to be the only French World Cup. We know that Benidorm is likely to continue, Cabras is likely to continue, Hulst is going out because they're organizing the World Championships. So that leaves 2 open slots. Tabor is expected to come back, and then for that final slot, they're hoping that Dublin stays in. It's not really any improvement on what we have now, and it also shows their reliance on Dublin. I heard that they are working hard to keep this race in the calendar, and they have to, because if Dublin leaves, they need to find another race outside of Belgium, and frankly, there is none.
Oh God, yeah, it's a grim situation. It's not looking good. But just to go in a little bit on the sustainability of the race itself, I think that it was questioned as well on the Belgian broadcast, and they were talking about the decrease of spectators, and it felt like they were also somewhat questioning the idea of racing in Ireland. And I personally, as I said, I think that it's the venue is, at times when you look at it from the TV, you have been there, but obviously there are more eyeballs from the TV side. And if you look at the coverage, I think that aesthetically it could have been a little bit better, but it's all right, and it does the job. I think the racing is great. If it rains, it's a great venue, and if it's now like we got today, a little bit more dry, there is plenty of room for the riders to dive bomb each other from corner to corner, and I think that is in a way also a positive. But I think that Flanders Classics needs to get their together and try to find a venue in Great Britain. In my opinion, I think that would probably be a little bit more sustainable if you pick the right venue, if you find the right organizers, if something has to be done, because I think that the potential is there to get a race in Great Britain. If you would lose Dublin, I think that the least that they could do is try to get a venue in Great Britain somewhere. I not have a specific location in mind, but I think that there's definitely the potential to do so. But it seems like that is currently, at least, not on the radar, because I haven't heard much about that.
It should be and. They should work to keep Dublin, because the atmosphere is good. Yes, there's maybe not a ton of fans, but the ones that are there, they make a bunch of noise. They have the horns, they show up early in the day for the youth races, they have the chainsaws, they keep the atmosphere going. It's good. There's a lot of young children here. It has the support races on the Saturday, which makes the Saturday a good event as well. And yes, at the same time, we should also encourage anybody to put on a race in the UK, because I feel they've been blindsided on the London idea. Whereas, why does it have to be in London? Like, I get that it's city marketing and nice for the World Cup, but what's wrong with having a World Cup in Leeds or in Scotland? I mean, they talked about potentially having a launch of the World Cup in Edinburgh, because they were disappointed there was no cyclocross in the Super World Championships. But nothing has really come from any of those discussions, as you said, and I think that's quite sad, because they cannot permit to lose Dublin. The course is indeed nothing special, but it does the job, and it's fine that there's a race like this. I, as said, would like to see it be very compact rather than so stretched as it is now, but whatever. That's just for me, and it's this silly thing because I'm like running around with my camera. My step counter is at 25,000 today, which my feet are definitely playing an influence in my opinion on the course at the end of the day. But it's a fine event, and while I wouldn't be as sad to see this go as, for instance, Benidorm, I still think it would be a shame if this goes, because it made for some good racing. And let's actually talk about some of that racing, because the U23s raced ahead of the elite races. Jente Michels attacked in the second lap and went on to take victory. Haverdings had a bad start, moved up into second. Dox came from a bit further in the running order and was with Haverdings. Dox eventually finished second ahead of Haverdings. I don't really think it's a surprise that Michels takes the win here, Issam. We've seen him on the podium in the big races this season. He was third in Lokeren. He was fourth in Kortrijk, just off the podium. So I don't think it's that surprising. Haverdings, he had a bad start. I would have been curious to see what he could have done without, but I think it was kind of what we expected. Dox, somebody we tipped in our European Championships preview as well, didn't come quite out there, but he is obviously a very talented rider.
I think that definitely the Michels win was something that was somewhat expected. I think that Dox performed well, and Haverdings, I don't know how his start was, but if that was the case indeed, then it was a bit of a shame. But I think that he also shows that the form is somewhat there, and if on a good day, he's definitely someone that could challenge. I have to say, I mean, BCO is up there in fifth, but the French overall, we haven't seen. I at least haven't seen any of the racing there. The French were a bit disappointing, or do I see it a little bit wrong?
Not really. I mean, I don't think this is a course for BCO. He started his season last week in Troyes. He was third twice there. I thought he looked better than he did on the stream of Troyes. He was fifth here. His big weakness was the barriers. He lost a couple of seconds compared to the fast jumpers there every lap. He will do better once the courses get muddy. That is something we also saw last year. He was fourth in Tabor at Worlds. He was third at French Nationals. He was third in Namur. The Namur one is the one I was thinking about. In Dublin here, when it was fast, he was 10th. In Benidorm, where it was fast, he was 5th. So we'll see a better BCO. I think you can say that it was somewhat disappointing. I mean, Simon in 12th is kind of where you would expect him. But apart from BCO, the rest of the top 10 is filled with Dutch and Belgians. Sparvel is someone I would have expected up there, but he ate it on the barriers in the first lap and then made another mistake and never really got back into it. Courses in 4th was good. He had some illness this week, actually also upon arrival here in Dublin, but he still raced and it went quite well. Furthermore, Cajasola and Senna Romein, two first-year Dutchies in the top 10. One races for Charles Legois, the other for Alpecin. Declined the deal at Visma because they required him to stop cross. But here's my question, Issam, because that top 10, as said, is stacked with those Dutch-Belgian flags. The junior top 10 is not the same. The junior woman top 10 is not the same. It's crucial for cross, and this fits to the development point I made about Morse. It's super hard to keep these riders in because BCO is in and Sparvel is in because they are on Van Rijssel, and Van Rijssel wants to be seen in cross, the bike brand. But a rider like Romein, a rider like Sola, they get scooped up by the big cross teams and they have more know-how around them and they develop more. They get better. Whereas a rider like Simon, as bike racing, nothing against their work, they're doing the best they can, but they can't compete with those teams. So one thing is, like, how do you encourage bike brands to stay in the sport? Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, the only thing is Olympics. It's the only reason they would want to be in there. And secondly, how do the non-Dutch and Belgian riders compete due to the advantage that the Dutch and Belgian riders have? They race on the best teams, they race on the best courses every week, the most difficult courses, and all of that really stacks up in the U23 category. And I think BCO is one rider that this season can, if it's muddy, make a challenge for a win in a World Cup. Sparvel is a rider who could potentially do that in the future, but it's hard. It's really, really hard to compete with the Dutch and Belgians because you're up against all those factors I just named.
Yeah, it is. It is a difficult period in the development of the riders after they kind of emerge out of this, the junior category, going to the under 23, and somewhat fall in a gap professionally in a way, and at least the Dutch and the Belgian riders don't really have that difficulty because then they get somewhat the support of the bigger teams, and they are also with the countries that are little bit, they have a little bit more know-how in how to get the riders to the next step, and become a full-time pro, or at least a pro that is able to, maybe if he's multidisciplinary, to combine it with the roads or something else. And they're also in an environment where that is possible. And I don't know, I think my mind is kind of going to the proposition that is laying there from the UCI in terms of trying to combine the points gained in terms of UCI ranking for the teams, and that the ranking that the cyclocross points gained, if a rider is for racing for a road team, then that will also count towards the overall ranking, and that could maybe help out certain riders in terms of teams thinking about signing a cyclocross rider a little bit more, and also think broader and think more internationally. And as you said, Van Rijssel is definitely a bike brand that is putting in the effort in terms of wanting to see their bikes in cyclocross, and I think that's a good sign. But it's not enough at the moment, I would say. I think that the discrepancy and the difference between Belgium and Netherlands and the rest, in a way, is just too big, and it's a difficult situation to be in, because you see it in the juniors. It's somewhat of a fair fight, and then you see multiple nations battle it out for a top 10 and a top 20. But once you get to the under 23, at least for the top 10, and that has been a tendency for several years. I mean, we see some of the French get their nose in, and sometimes the Czech rider, sometimes an Italian rider, but it's not the tendency. It's not something that we see on a regular basis, and I think it's not a great situation to have, and it's definitely not something that will help out in terms of the internationalization of the sport. And yeah, as I said before, it's a tricky situation, especially for riders that are not Dutch or Belgium, I would say.
So about the points thing, I think that could definitely help, but let's tie that to the junior women's races on. So first, the summary of the junior women's race. In the first lap, Lison Desperet, the French rider, took off, and she was chased by a group of 4 or 5 riders. From that group, Lydia Cusack broke free. The American started on the 4th row. She's only done 2 UCI races this season. She caught Desperet, and then in the 3rd out of 4 laps, she attacked on the barriers. She was jumping, Desperet was running. Desperet got back onto the wheel, then made a small mistake, and Cusack went off and took victory. Desperet finished 2nd, and then the 3rd place went to Carrier. So Lydia Cusack, she raced 3 races actually. On the 2nd day of Nashta, she raced Junior Woman and Woman Elite, which is not allowed, so she got disqualified from the Junior Women's results. But that was her first real weekend of cyclocross racing. What does it tell us? That several juniors, because she's not the only one, are altering their approach to the cyclocross season. She came from the road. She raced Road World Championships. That was at the end of September. So obviously it makes a lot of sense that she takes a proper rest period and tries to stay fresh, because there's no point in burning out in the season. So I think she made the right approach. I spoke with her team manager. They said they went for the AJ August plan of 2 seasons ago. Just focus on the World Cups and Nationals, and that's kind of it. So she's doing the rest of the World Cups. I think it's a smart decision. But what does it tell us that she's taking this approach? She's not the only one. We see it with a lot of the elite riders. So it's nice that the UCI wants to integrate this point system. But apart from the point system, what is your game plan for cyclocross? Like, yes, you will motivate teams to take on cyclocross riders, but how do you make sure that the multidisciplinary riders can actually do the multidisciplines? How can you make sure that the UCI, whose product is cycling, which is all disciplines, is as strong as possible? Because the way that everything is planned is kind of messy. Like, I don't know if Cusack is going to win every single World Cup this season. She was quite strong today, but there were some riders missing, and she was fresh, and others have more races in their legs, and they are going to train in Spain now, whereas Cusack is racing nationals and then doing the Christmas trip before training towards the Worlds. But it needs to be more than just the overhaul of the point system. It needs to be like a critical decision of how all disciplines are integrated together. So where is Cyclocross Worlds in the calendar? Where are our spring classics? Where do we place gravel worlds? Where do we place the road gravel events like Strade Bianchi and Paris Tours? Where do we place like all our big events so it makes sense that this point system, if it's all of a sudden counting for everything, also makes sense? Because just saying, oh well, all your cyclocross points are divided by 3 and they count towards the road ranking, or you just keep that or whatever, that makes no sense.
It obviously, the idea itself needs optimization, and I think that they definitely need they need to consider this dilemma in a way in which you obviously want to also give cyclocross teams something to work for, and not only, and what is it going to do for if road teams are going to have obviously a bigger budget and just buy some of the better cyclocross riders? What is that going to do with the cyclocross teams and the longevity of that? I think that the idea itself is a good idea. I think that it is an idea that could help this situation in a way, because we just see that the Dutch and the Belgian riders, they just basically sign with an Alpecin, or at least with the Roodhoof brothers, or they sign with a Paul Sousa, and then they get their support, they get through, and then when they are elites and they have somewhat good results, they make it in a way, or they're not and they have to change careers. That's also something that can happen. But for other nationalities, it's basically I need to race well in the World Cups, and after the juniors, when I get to under 23, well, we'll see where it ends up. Maybe I need to focus more on the road and try to get somewhat of a good contract there. And when you do that, that switch in focusing, I don't know if that is also good for the development of someone that's young and wants to do well in cyclocross as well. And that sometimes leads them away from cyclocross. And I don't have the solution. I don't have it. And I don't know if you have it, but I don't think it's something that I don't think we can find an ideal solution in 10 minutes. And I don't think you can do it in a day. But I feel that the UCI needs to look at the current situation in which they are in, and optimize it so that all the disciplines that they have that are under the UCI are doing well. And I think at the moment, it's fair to say that cyclocross is probably the worst off if we talk about maybe the track as well at times, but I think track has their own kind of thing, and they're Olympic and they have their things going. But I feel that disregarding track, and we look at mountain bike, road, and cyclocross, I think cyclocross at the moment is definitely in the worst position, I feel. And I don't know how that's going to be fixed by the ranking, but I just feel that it has some benefits and it could help out, but it's a difficult situation.
I think the ranking would do good things for cyclocross, but I'm not sure it's entirely fair to make like road promotion and relegation dependent on it, also because it's like BMX riders and stuff that count towards it. So I'm just curious, like, how are you going to balance it? Because if you look at the UCI rankings, Elie Iserbyt is leading the rankings with 2,577 points at the moment. That's a decent amount of points that go towards the road ranking that could make a difference. But if you like look at a rider like ranked 15th in the world, Kevin Kuhn, he has 900 points, and then you kind of come to the point where it's quickly peanuts, because it's worthless compared to how many points you can earn in the road, and mountain bike has a completely different point system. So how do you like balance those things out? Those are all nuances which I will definitely need to see and read before I can really draw my opinion upon this proposal. But something does need to happen, and to just finalize, UCI needs to see cyclocross or cycling as a year-round product, and cyclocross is the winter part of that, and they need to make sure that everything makes sense and that they can generate much more attention from it. And I'm a far bigger fan of those ideas and proposals rather than like these one cycling super league ideas. We need no promotion, relegation, closed circuit, everyone always racing against each other. I think you can definitely generate more attention and thus revenue for cycling if you plan your calendar better, for starters. Then just still briefly on that junior women's race, Isam, I think my takeaway is that these second year juniors, yes, they finish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are not as strong as the generation we had last year, which is of course a very tall barrier. Yeah, it was an interesting battle. Cusack, as I said, the barriers made the difference for her. I would say Desprez was slightly better in the corners, and then they were roughly matched on power. Desprez definitely went too early. Cusack rode more mature. This is probably also the course where it's best to start at the back. You can overtake quite easily, and she moved up super swiftly as well. Then back to her approach, I already went over that. I think that's a good approach. And Carrier, who was like one of the better first years last year, she kind of did the opposite in terms of approach. She barely took any rest after the mountain bike season, where she finished second at the World Championships. Went straight into the cross season, has done a bunch of races. She raced Rochester, then Really Rad, then Pan American Championships, then Canadian Championships. Dublin was her 9th race of the season, whereas for Cusack it was her 3rd. And Carrier is definitely not as strong as she was last year. She didn't look remotely like the rider I saw in Namur. In Namur she looked fresh, easy, the power came off. Of course, last year she also did a bunch of races, and that cost her at the end of the season. She wasn't as good at the World Championships. Probably pressure played a role there as well. She's signed with Arkea, which is definitely something encouraging for her. I think she'll be a good road rider, but man, she definitely didn't seem like herself or like what she was like last year, and I think that's going to be really, really hard to turn around at this point. Also, considering the fact that certain riders were not at this race who are quite strong, a couple of the Czech riders. It will be more packed in the Christmas World Cups when the next round is in Hulst and then Zonhoven.
Yeah, it's going to be a question for her of turning it around, because I think that if you solely look on last season, I would have said that she's definitely going to be the lady to beat this year, but it seems that she's somewhat struggling, and there are still some races to turn it around, and depends on what her goals are. If she wants to be good at the Worlds, then you don't need to be good right now, and you need to kind of build up towards the Worlds and have the best possible shape there. And I think that if that is the goal, then there's not too much to worry about. But as you said, it's at the moment not looking amazingly. Still a good result, but she has to definitely put a step or two in the right direction to be more at the front and face the competition that will be coming later on this season. And if she wants to be the favorite for Worlds, or at least one of the favorites, then the level maybe needs to be up a little bit more. But I think for now, it's a bit early on for the juniors. They have a different kind of season, and as you said, she also had a fair share of racing already this season, and that could play an influence as well. We don't know how she built up towards the cyclocross season and the campaign that she's doing, but as I said, I think that if the Worlds is the most important thing, then there is not much to worry about for her, and she has to build up and try to get towards the World Championships in the best possible shape.
I mean, there are 3 weeks for her of nothing now. I say that, but she might as well also be racing here. So actually, I'm going to retract that statement. So to put this podcast to a conclusion, you texted me what I thought about the Czech riders in this race. Bukowska was definitely a bit disappointing to me. I think this would have been a good course for her. Again, we're in the juniors also in this weird moment. Like, some riders have done many races, others haven't. Obviously, the freshness effect will carry through at some point, but to a certain extent, there's also time to train in Spain now, which some riders are going to do, or just train at home. Godvaldova, I thought she looked okay, but this is not a course for her. Wait for the mud to come. That's really where she did quite decently last year, in Namur especially. But also, I think a fifth place is about the level she will be. She might be a bit more up, but it's not, I think, that Goldwaldova is going to be a massive, massive contender this season. She had that really good race in Namur, but she's a mountain biker, and that's the course that comes closest to her. On the men's side, the Czech have Bazant, but he wasn't there today, so they didn't feature at all in the race. The men's junior race was honestly quite boring for the win, actually. There was a leading group of 8 in the first lap. In the second lap, 3 riders broke away. There was the French duo of Théophile Valsal and Søren Bruyère-Joumard. And then there was the Belgian Lennis Jacobs. The 3 were just there, but they didn't really do much. And Valsal crashed, I think, with 3 laps to go, 2.5 laps to go, and was over for. Then Jacobs placed one attack, and then he got countered by Bruyère-Joumard, who went on and take the victory. Gilles Lejeune from Deschartes Hens FSP made a good charge through the field to finish second, and Lennis Jacob finished third. I don't really have too much to comment. It was a bit more muddy back then, a bit more slippery, but it was really the power of these boys that made the difference. Vassal was good, but crash. It's the second race of the season. That's important. After the European Championships, also here in Dublin, he doesn't quite deliver. He has had some issue with Bruyère-Joumard in France, but I think we'll see Vassal in the Christmas races, but he needs to keep his head calm. There's obviously some pressure mounting on him now, and that should be released at some point by 1 or 2 good results in the World Cup, and then hopefully he can chain together some good results. I don't really have too much to add to the rest, unless you still have something you want to know, Isam.
No, really. I think that it's still a bit too early to conclude too much on the junior side, and there's still some racing left. So we, looking forward to that. But I just a small remark. I think that I think that they deserve to be broadcasted in one way or the other. I feel that when the UCI organizes official races for the junior categories and the under 23, I feel that I at least have a right to watch it and not fly all the way to Dublin and then see it. I think that that it's also good for the riders themselves. They get some recognition in a way, and I don't know. I think that any other sport in some way would have at least streamed it in some sort of broadcasted it in a way, and I think I don't know. I feel that is something that maybe should be looked at, but I'm quite positive on that it will not happen anytime soon. But it's a wish, and sometimes wishes are not fulfilled. So I guess I have to live with that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it also somewhat makes sense. It's super early, and they need to test the broadcast equipment before, etc., costs, etc. But yeah, it would be nice if it would be on a stream, but it is what it is. Actually, I do have one final remark here. So the Dublin course is somewhat atypical. I feel like when the men junior race, it was a bit more representative because of the conditions. It was definitely a bit more muddy, but it's nothing like the European Championships. I mean, European champion Agostinacho finished 10th. Yes, he crashed once, but that was definitely not the lead reason for his result today. The course also played a role. He never really got into the race. He just wasn't there. He just didn't seem confident enough through the corners. And the same can be said for his brother Filippo, who finished 13th in the men under 23 race after a podium finish at the European Championships. Good. Long episode, Isam. Plenty to be discussed here from Namur. Thank you for being here. No, Namur. Oh, it's definitely getting too late now. We are in Dublin. I am in Dublin. I'm flying home tomorrow morning. Isam, thank you so much.
You're in Ireland. No, but thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure. It's here almost closing into 11 p.m., but it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We will be back next week. We are racing on Sunday in Cabras, the World Cup. I'll be coming nice and from home again. But in the midweek, we have an interview with Jules van Kempen from Cervelo Orange Living Team, and we talk about some of his developmental stories of when he came to Europe racing during the COVID pandemic, and just a bit more on his season. So, Isam, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for the graphics, as always, the thumbnail. And we will be back later this week with an episode with Jules, and then next week to cover the World Cup in Cabras. Goodbye.